So I'm gonna explain how we solve the problem of how to pass the affected keys to our backend. So the original problem statement explains that the problem in the old backend validation was receiving board and pending only. This is triggered by a use effect that we passed on the board and pending states using a backend API fetch API call. So we pass this to use effect monitoring changes in the state of board and pending. But this is lacking due to it only passes the current pending move made by the player. But the new requirement needed us to suffice all of the current move that is affected in the current state of the board, and we do not move the OR tiles, but since this is adjacent to the three letters that we move, meaning this all five will be affected, it must be passed on from front end to back end. So we created a use memo containing an expensive calculation to monitor the tiles and the key that we need to pass on. So it has a dependency of board, pending, and the validation affected keys. So this is the same board and pending state that we have, but the only thing added here is the validation keys. We need a way somehow to also monitor the affected keys, and we'll be able to pass it on to our fetch API. So the initial problem that we have is we tried passing the current move tiles into our existing API function, but there is a mismatch of TypeScript exposed in our type. So we had to go to our API and replace our old way of passing board and pending record string into a type which accepts keys, letter, and tile. And we pass it on here, current move tiles, and that's what we passed on to the backend in this route post method. So then we also change our current move tiles, and we no longer need the board and pending since it's already contained inside this use memo. And we also added some console logs so that we'll be able to see really if we are passing on the data. As you can see here, when we try to place tiles, for example ES, we are logging, and means this is true working console at last. So why this use memo and use effect work together? So before, only board and pending is being passed, but we need some way for board, pending, and the affected keys beside the pending move that we created to be merged together as one, like this. This all four, if highlighted, must be passed on. So we calculated that through use memo. So every time that the board changes its state, we calculate the affected, the pending, and the board all together, and we assign it to a variable we call current move tiles, and we assign it to use effect because every time that this use memo changes, they have to track this three variables: the board, pending, and the validation affected keys. So use memo is assigned to calculate the values, and use effect is assigned to monitor those three variable changes. So every time these three variable changes, you need to recalculate. That's why we are using this both. And as we verified on our console, it fetches the affected keys that we need, and we pass it on to our backend. through this API call that we have. Verifying it, we are passing the backend received data. So in actuality, we are resolving this issue.